Good evening. My name is Michelle Storms. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Executive Director of the ACLU of Washington. I am honored to welcome you all, together with the National African American Reparations Commission, also known as NAARC, and Tsuru for Solidarity. NAARC is a group of distinguished professionals from across the country with outstanding accomplishments in the fields of law, medicine, journalism, academia, history, civil rights, and social justice. All are united in a common commitment to fight for reparatory justice, compensation, and restoration of African American communities that were plundered by the historical crimes of slavery, segregation, and colonialism, and that continue to be victimized by the legacies of slavery and American apartheid. Tsuru for Solidarity is a nonviolent direct action project of Japanese American social justice advocates working to end detention sites and support frontline immigrant and refugee communities that are being targeted by racist, inhumane immigration policies. Tsuru stands on the moral authority of Japanese Americans who suffered the atrocities and legacy of US concentration camps during World War II, and they say stop repeating history. Tonight, even as we talk about the harms to Japanese and African Americans, we operate from unceded indigenous territories and in a context of broken treaties and unresolved harm to Native peoples. I'm speaking to you from the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Coast Salish people, who have stewarded this land for generations. Our ACLU office in downtown Seattle sits on the unceded territory of the Duwamish people. We owe them honor and restoration as well as we remember the role our country played in stripping them of their land, culture, and language. And we recognize there is so much work we need to do to make this country fair for Indigenous people and for all people. In the early 1940s, Seattle's Japantown, then located on Main and Jackson and between 5th and 23rd Avenues, was nearly 50 years old, and it was a lively Asian American community with hotels and restaurants, grocers, barbershops, but overnight, 10,000 Japanese Americans living in and around Seattle became enemy aliens. And with no due process, our neighbors were taken to the Minidoka internment camp in Idaho after being forced to stay in modified racehorse stables at the Puyallup Fairgrounds. Those years of detention that followed forever changed lives, families, and communities. And that wouldn't be the last time Asian Americans would be scapegoated and attacked. Growing fear and misinformation surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic, stoked by our former president, has led to a rise in racist acts against Asian Americans, including last week's horrific murders in Atlanta. We must acknowledge the current and very dangerous landscape of anti-Asian hate that is occurring right now. We must be in solidarity with our Asian siblings. I'm grateful for tonight's opportunity to be together. So tonight, we call for the long overdue examination of unresolved reparations for Black people. Our context is this: our country was built on the unpaid labors of generations of Black people. And even after emancipation, barriers to the pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for Black people, barriers to the most basic of human dignities, barriers which were enacted in law in this country, have been erected and caused harm to Black people. So as a result, we continue to have generational gaps in wealth, educational opportunity, housing, health and wellness, justice, all the kinds of opportunity. And this must be rectified. H.R. 40 is a congressional bill that would establish a commission to study reparations proposals for African Americans. It's a starting point for acknowledgement, healing, and redress. Now, all three of these things are inextricably linked: America's gross mistreatment of Native peoples and land, continued scapegoating and animosity toward our Asian siblings, and America's continued struggle for reparations for people of African descent. This country's failure to meaningfully address and redress past slavery and present-day discrimination is of lethal proportions. If we wish to have an America that is truly free and fair, we must be in solidarity together, and Congress must pass H.R. 40. Our program today will explore why this is imperative and will go into much greater depth. Thank you so much for being here. We are grateful for your participation and passion. So now as we enter into this program, we have two amazing cultural, spiritual leaders who will share some expressions to get us started. Thank you.
I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child, a long way from home. I sing that song in honor to remember all of us who have sometimes been stripped from our ancestors, who sometimes might feel like motherless children in the way that we and our ancestors have been treated. However, I'm here today so that we can honor all those that came before us, because of this, their power and their strength that is going to help us get through all the other challenges and to also make sure that we triumph at this time. I'm Nana Malaya, one who speaks in parables, sometimes called the dancing diplomat. I'm here today so that I can honor our ancestors with libation. Libation is a non-denominational form of prayer. Everyone can use it at any time and in your own way. I will be taking water from this vessel, pouring it into this cup, and then I will be taking that water and pouring it into the plant in honor of all those that came before us. And as though the rain were coming from the sky, the water is blessing us, because water cleanses our body, it quenches our thirst, and it also cleanses our soul. So as I take this water, I'm going to say in the tree language from Ghana, West Africa. My father's connected to Ghana, West Africa. My mother's connected to our Native American and African American families. So I say, I go, I may, I go, I may, I go, I may. That's asking for God's attention. Once could be an accident, twice could be a coincidence, 3 times is the number of purpose. And so I pour this water into this plant as though to acknowledge again the energy that comes from heavens down to earth, so that we can think of the water that flows through our rivers, and it's the rivers that connect us. It's our bloodstream that's the river even in our body, connecting our family lines and lineage. I pray for all those who have passed, and I think of the last names in my family, and I'd like you to think of the last names in your family. Mine are Rays, Browns, Ruckers, Williams, and all those of African, Native American, and all other descendants, the positive energies that are out here in the world. Let us remember that we're all divine in our own way. Remember those who have recently departed in your family. If you'd like to mention them, feel free. I'm going to mention my mom, Mary Wilhelmina, my father, Ebenezer Ray, my son, Chano Rucker, my sister. But I also think of those who have recently departed and all those who have been historical in terms of their energies for us. We want to recognize all the energies, African American, Native American, Iroquois, Cherokee, Navajo, Piscataway, and all the other nations here in this land. We also want to recognize all those whose names we remember, and we want to remember those names we don't know. The Middle Passage and that horrible experience of the European slave trade. But we want to remember the ancestors from Ghana, West Africa, from Egypt and Kemet and Nubia and South Africa, as well as South America and anywhere else our energies and folks have been, throughout Asia and the connections of people of color all over the world. May we recognize that all of these people, whom we know, whom we don't know, have been here to help us establish the strength that we need to continue to conquer and to continue to thrive and to continue to be the manifestation of great positive energies and the spirits that we are. May we remember all the children, because they say, not only do the young walk proudly for the wisdom of the dead, but it's the young who will inherit the earth. So we want to make sure that everything we do benefits the next 7 generations to come. So as we think of water, as we think of nourishment, as we think of our bodies being cleansed and our spirits being pure, I pour this water and I say, Amen, Aho, Ashe, and may you think and praise all those that came before you, the ones you know and the ones that you don't know. We've benefited from all those positive energies today. So we are definitely blessed from all those. Bum bum ba dee dum, bum bum ba dee dee dum, bum bum ba dee dum, bum bum ba dee dee dum. Listen more often to things than to beings. The dead are in the flowing water. They're in the burning bush. They're in the wailing child. They're in the drum. They're in the flute. They're in your heart. Remember, the dead are not dead. We honor them and we pray that we will have reparations in our lifetime. Ashe, Amen, Aho, MALAYA.
시그세강 수조무헨세간로 번너무진세간단 오멈무료세강각 우주무조세강. The first line of the Shigusegan, the 4 vows of a bodhisattva, says sentient beings are innumerable, and yet we vow to liberate all. It is in this spirit that I would like to offer the blessing today for this event, the Japanese American and African American Advancing the Movement for Reparations, HR 40 gathering. And my message for this assembled panelists and those who are here to advance the movement for reparations and this legislation, HR 40, comes from a teaching or an image from our Japanese cultural and religious heritage called kintsugi. Kin means gold, and tsugi comes from the Japanese verb tsugu, to join. And it comes from a tradition inside of our pottery and ceramics, especially based in the city of Kyoto, where if you have a plate or a valuable teacup that breaks, instead of throwing it away, we use traditionally a lacquer resin to tsugu, or to join again the broken parts. And then we use, on top of that break line, gold, that's the word kin, to adorn or to enhance that history of that teacup or plate that had been broken. Our American life is full of breakages, fractures, disjunctures, and hurt, pain that in the Buddhist tradition, we call it the mountain of pain and tears that can fill the 7 oceans. a racialized karma, a trauma that comes from generations of racial exclusion, racial violence, and trauma that is in not only our minds, but our bodies, transmitted across generations. And we talk about karma in our tradition to talk about the seeds or the hurts, the suffering that is unaddressed by one generation that gets, unfortunately, imprinted on the next generation. And so for this work of repair, reparation in its deepest sense, not just about financial recompense for past injustice, which is something Ta-Nehisi Coates has reminded us, that reparation is not just that, but a national reckoning with this racial karma that leads, in his words, to spiritual renewal. And so it is in that spirit that I urge you to have this conversation across communities, across different histories of hurt and pain that needs repair. Repair that is not about something we can simply cast aside and discard, but one that we put back together again and join. One where divisions that comes from a singular or supremacist idea can be overcome by vision in which we are interlinked together. And not only interlinked together, one that as we fix those breakages in the pottery, in our nation, we find a way to enhance it with gold, not only about gold as money, but gold as a form of recognition of all of these hurts that until they are faced, we cannot become free. That first line, sentient beings are innumerable, and yet we vow to liberate all. It's something that can only be done together, and I'm so grateful for all of you joining today for the Japanese American and African American movement for reparations and HR 40. And with that, let me end with one final chant. Jiho san shi shi son bu sa mo ko ya mi.
The National African American Reparations Commission is delighted to join hands again with Jeffrey Robinson and our partners at ACLU to present another educational and action-oriented forum on HR 40 and reparations. Our title is Japanese Americans and African Americans, Advancing the Struggle for Reparations in HR 40. What a powerful theme. Our goal is to tell the story of the interconnected and inspirational quest for reparatory justice by Japanese Americans and African Americans as we collectively work for the passage of HR 40, the bill to establish a commission to study and develop reparations proposals for African Americans, not just to study whether reparations are warranted, but a bill that will actually develop policy proposals by the federal government. Policy proposals by the federal government. As Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, whom you'll hear from later on this program, often says, reparations is the only overarching policy prescription which will address and redress systemic racism. So we invite you to listen, to learn, and prepare to engage and to act.
Hello, this is Stanley SHIKUMA. I serve on the National Leadership Council of Tsuru for Solidarity and am president of the Seattle chapter of the Japanese American Citizens League. In 1942, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, an act that authorized the forced removal and indefinite incarceration of 120,000 Americans of Japanese descent during World War II. 46 years later, President Ronald Reagan signed H.R. 442, the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, that authorized an official apology from the government to each camp survivor, $20,000 in individual monetary compensation, and the establishment of a community education fund to teach the lessons of this mass violation of civil rights to the public. Today, we will look at the movement for Japanese American redress and reparations to see how it evolved and how it succeeded. In hindsight, some may conclude that the path to victory was clear-cut and obvious, carried out by a unified and singularly focused Japanese American community and our natural allies. In truth, the process was often not clear at all, with many differing proposed paths and competing strategies for success coming from a number of opinionated individuals and organizations. Help came in some unexpected quarters, and unity was tested many times, and sometimes failed. Yet, victory was achieved in the end. This is my personal view of how redress and reparations was won, based on my experience and knowledge as one who was involved at the time, mainly here in Seattle. First, we will look at what I call the storybook version, a summary you might read in a high school text or a newspaper article. Then I will introduce the many players involved in the story before taking a deeper dive into some of the highlights and key turning points using examples from the Seattle movement. At the end, I will review some key issues faced by the national movement. Turn on screen share. Okay, for the storybook version of redress. In this version, redress first arises as a concept in 1970, but languishes before gaining traction through creation of a JACL redress committee in 1978. Congress creates a commission to study the issue in 1980. Its final report states the incarceration was the result of racism, wartime hysteria, and a failure of political leadership. Armed with these facts, the Japanese American community unites with a broad coalition of allies to push through the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, signed by President Ronald Reagan. This story paints a picture of a simple, clear path with a simple, clear strategy that leads directly to victory. Very true, except it was never quite so simple, clear, or direct. To understand why, let's look at all the different players and interests involved. The Seattle players. In Seattle, we first had SERC, the Seattle Evacuation Redress Committee, which developed the Seattle Plan, the first concrete proposal for redress and reparations. All future redress proposals would build off of this model. Once the commission came about, SERC reorganized as the Community Coalition on Redress and Reparations. CCRR lobbied to get a commission hearing held in Seattle and organized over 100 people to testify. Once the commission work was done, CCRR then reached out beyond Seattle and beyond the Japanese American community and renaming itself the Washington Coalition on Redress. For the national players, the Japanese American Citizens League was formed in 1929 and is the only national Japanese American organization with chapters across the country. JACL also has many useful connections inside the DC Beltway. The National Council on Japanese American Redress, NCJAR, was formed in 1979. NCJAR does not trust the commission or the legislative approach and opts to take redress to the courts in a class action lawsuit. The National Coalition on Redress and Reparation forms in 1980. Largely Sansei-led, meaning third-generation Japanese Americans, NCRR championed grassroots participation, mass mobilization, coalition building, and working closely with groups like the Rainbow Coalition and the Congressional Black Caucus. Our Japanese American members of Congress. In the House, we had Representatives Norman Mineta and Bob Matsui. Little bit of redress trivia here. Norm Mineta met Republican Senator Alan Simpson of Wyoming at a Boy Scouts jamboree during World War II. In the Senate, we have Senators Daniel Inouye and Spark Matsunaga. Another piece of trivia, Senator Inouye befriends Senator Bob Dole of Kansas, while both spent months together in rehab following World War II. The Coram Nobis teams. The legal teams for Korematsu, Yasui, and Hirabayashi were fighting to overturn their clients' World War II convictions and thus undermine the World War II Supreme Court decisions in support of incarceration. Their success helped highlight the injustice of the camps and exposed the racist thinking underlying all three of these cases. And finally, community coalitions. In order to succeed, we first had to unite the Japanese American community, the camp survivors and their descendants, Army veterans of the 442nd Regimental Combat Team and Military Intelligence Service, or MIS, churches, and community groups. We also recruited academics and professionals, elected officials and politicians, and other community allies to our cause. Working with all these groups and holding them all together was not an easy task. Issues of strategy, tactics, and even trust were continually put to the test, yet we persevered. Now let's take a deeper dive into the history of redress. Reparations is a form of resistance. Looking back, I believe our path to redress and reparations starts in 1942, when Yasui, Hirabayashi, and Korematsu choose to challenge the government orders all the way to the Supreme Court, and resistance manifests in other ways inside the camps. After the war, a feeble attempt at compensation for property losses falls flat when the government pays only 9 cents on the dollar in compensation, stretched over nearly 10 years. Following the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, and the struggles for ethnic studies, people began talking about reparations within the Japanese American community. JACL takes the first tentative step with a resolution calling for redress and reparations in 1970, but nothing really is done, in part because no one knows exactly what reparations means. Many ideas are thrown around, but once CERC develops the Seattle plan, it becomes the basis for all future redress proposals. Several things happen at the end of the 1970s. JACL steps up and hires staff to lead a redress committee tasked with passing legislation. In Seattle, we hold the first day of remembrance to protest the historic injustice and honor those impacted. It galvanizes the community and pulls thousands into the fight. And when we elect Mike Lowry to Congress, he introduces a redress bill. It quickly dies, but it establishes a $25,000 payment as a baseline for future bills. The Commission on Wartime Removal and Internment of Civilians was the most hated idea in the redress movement until it became the most loved. Everyone thought it was either insulting, asking us to prove an injustice, or a delay tactic aimed at killing redress completely. Through demands to get outside the Beltway and listen to the people, however, it was transformed into a powerful catharsis of anger and feeling bottled up for 40 years and launched a mass movement. The resulting report was all we could have hoped for. With the commission behind us, attention turned to winning the votes to pass a redress bill in both the House and Senate. In Seattle, WCR lobbied each member of Congress from our state, passed local redress bills at the city, county, and state level, built new coalitions outside the Japanese American community, and kept the issue in the public eye. NCRR, JACL, and our Japanese American members of Congress did the same. Momentum was clearly building. Finally, in 1988, both the House and Senate passed H.R. 442, the Civil Liberties Act, and President Ronald Reagan signed it into law on August 10th. The first redress checks were delivered in 1990 and continued until all 82,000 plus were delivered by 1999. Now let's take a look at some of the issues. The fight for redress and reparations for Japanese Americans was long and hard. First, we had to convince our own community that it was a good idea, a worthwhile idea, that actually had a chance at success. Then we had to convince the Japanese American members of Congress of the same, that it wouldn't be political suicide for them. And then we had to win over a majority in both houses, the public and a conservative and frankly skeptical president, in order to succeed. Along the way, we encountered many thorny issues, such as who qualifies and for how much? Is a legislative approach more likely to win, or a class action lawsuit? Do we ask for everything we want, or only what we think is realistic? I think the two key issues in the struggle were, first, establishing the three key elements of any redress bill: an official apology, individual monetary compensation, and a community education fund. Second, we needed to identify our base of support. Here, we were split between those who wanted professionals, experts, and lobbyists to be central, and those who wanted the grassroots and community coalitions in the forefront. In the end, I think we found that both were essential. And the final point: when the story of redress is told, we often look at the spokespersons and the people at the table. We don't often recognize the indispensable work that went on behind the scenes, the work that made the speech or the photo op possible, the women running the movement. Going forward, we must recognize that equality was often lacking in the movement, and that we can stop repeating history. In conclusion, let me say that every group will see a key turning point where they succeeded when no one else could, and every group will assert that without their contribution, redress would have failed, and every group would be correct. We cannot do it alone. Thank you.
The inhumanity of the enslavement era and racial and economic degradation since were fundamental features of the growth and development of the United States. Slavery did not end the injury. Following its abolition and refusal to sustain even a modicum of the promised 40 acres, the U.S. government at the federal, state, and local levels perpetuated, condoned, and profited from policies and practices that continue to brutalize and disadvantage Black people and obliterate the right to self-determination. Slavery morphed into chain gangs and convict leasing, into the peonage system and sharecropping, into lynchings and massacres, Jim Crow apartheid and voter suppression, and the denial of government program benefits, all combining to exacerbate housing, health, wealth, and educational gaps, as well as the targeting of Blacks for mass incarceration and the death penalty. All of these laws, policies, and practices warrant repair. And Black people have demanded repair from the beginning. Two of the first formal records of petitions for reparations that were pursued and won came from formerly enslaved Black women, Belinda Royal and Henrietta Wood. There was a pension movement seeking compensation for enslavement from federal agencies led by Callie House and Isaiah Dickinson in 1898. There was the repatriation movement of Marcus Garvey in the 1920s. There was Queen Mother Audley Moore, President Mario Bedelli, the Black Panther Party, the Black United Front, Dorothy Lewis, and more. In fact, just about every Black nationalist movement during the 60s and 70s had the issue of reparations as part of their platform in some way, shape, form, or fashion. Civil rights leaders James Forman and Dr. Martin Luther King embraced the concept as well. But it was the end of the 20th century that brought about the modern era of the reparations movement with the 1988 founding of NCOBRA, the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America. Congress had just voted to provide reparations to the Japanese Americans for unjust internment during World War II. What a phenomenal and very current precedent to follow. And so Congressman John Conyers did, and it is the bill on the table right now, H.R. 40, the Commission to Study and Develop Reparation Proposals for African Americans Act. That has provided the mechanism through which to have a public policy conversation about this issue in the Congress of the United States, strategically and intentionally patterned off of the Civil Liberties Act of 1988. And with the advent of the 21st century, the National African American Reparations Commission, NAARC, joined the continuum of historical efforts, adding its energy in the pursuit of reparations for African Americans. While not a product of the federal government, and while not all specifically designated as reparations, some examples of reparatory justice for Black people have included the 1974 $10 million settlement, including lifelong medical treatment to victims and heirs of the Tuskegee syphilis study, where 399 Black men over a 40-year period were left untreated to study the disease. The $150,000 paid in 1994 to each of the 11 survivors and those forced to flee the 1923 Rosewood, Florida massacre, along with a scholarship fund for student descendants. A scholarship fund and memorial passed in 2001 in Tulsa, Oklahoma, to commemorate the 1921 massacre that left over 300 Black people dead and 40 square blocks of Black businesses, homes, and schools obliterated. Litigation is ongoing today for more robust redress. The $10 million granted in 2013 to Black victims of North Carolina's forced sterilization program. In 2015, the Chicago City Council passed a reparations ordinance providing an apology and $20 million to survivors and families of police torture, including psychological counseling, free college education, the creation of public memorials, and educational curriculum. In 2019, Evanston, Illinois, earmarked tax dollars from its recreational cannabis industry to fund reparation initiatives in the city. The spirit of reparations is sweeping the country, most notably from the state of California, also in cities across the country, including Chicago, Asheville, Burlington, Providence, San Diego, San Francisco, Seattle, Elaine, Tulsa, Amherst, DC, and more, joining the effort to uncover their own histories every day. Reparations advocates have challenged corporations, industries, and academic institutions that benefited from the profits made from the trafficking in human beings. The Virginia and Princeton theological seminaries have made their mark, and the dioceses of the Episcopal Church have committed monies as a moral statement of the church's historic complicity. Georgetown University, which stands today because of the sale of Black people owned by its founding Jesuits, is grappling with approaches for reparatory justice. The ACLU, NAACP, Human Rights Watch, the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, the Movement for Black Lives, National Council of Churches, the U.S. Conference of Mayors, Ben and Jerry's Ice Cream, the Players Coalition of professional athletes, coaches, and owners across the leagues, and many, many, many more have joined NAARC and NCOBRA in endorsing reparations. It is a sad commentary, however, sad, that despite all the momentum to date, particularly within the last 2 years, the United States government has not taken responsibility or attempted reparations for the paramount and fundamental role it has played. Passage of H.R. 40 will begin the process of an official reckoning of the past and the healing that can come from a reparations settlement, distinct from and not to be confused with ordinary public policy, to be fashioned in as many ways as necessary to equitably address the era of enslavement and its manifestations of injustice that still linger today. Reparations, unquestionably, is an issue whose time has come. The role that government, corporations, industries, academic and religious institutions, the media companies, private estates, and others played in supporting the institution of slavery and subsequent discrimination directed against Blacks are roles that must be acknowledged, must be apologized for, and must be redressed. Such recognition with repair is essential toward healing and the closing of a shameful era of U.S. history.
Hi, My name is Kelly Richardson. I use she and her pronouns, and I am a poet, coach, and educator calling in from the lands of the Puyallup people, which settlers have now come to call Tacoma, Washington. It's my honor to give this offering, which is a piece called Reparations. Who is served by these broken hearts? I am bewildered and lost to the lesson. I yearn for the tipping point, the change in the mean season when sorrow submits to joy, when all the bloods run down the drain, tilled soil satiated with gold mined from the ruins. Sassy ladies rocking slowly on sleepy porches, not rocking their dying babies into the next life. And my broad, unbreakable brothers mobilize to command and demand that the debt be paid, erasing the bullseye from our backs, annihilating the plague of the prison pipeline from our dying family trees. Because contrary to popular belief, we don't need pain to sustain hope. So we wait. We wait and we will the scripture to manifest. And we go on and on and on and on. Furrowed cocoa brows strain our bright, tired eyes squint to spot mercy on the horizon. Our brains burn to settle a score of time-honored terror, of choking on safe silence, of living as collateral damage, of walking and leaning, strutting and steady mobbing. Our living death is a museum visited by vultures, savvy scavengers in crisp shirts and suit jackets, armed with the illusion of self-love and success. We raise up to be knocked down again and again and even still and by and once more and over and under and beyond the scope of we shall overcome. And one sweet day, and the promised land we would no longer even recognize. Past swing low, sweet chariot, and that after school special Black History Month resilience that's come to be expected of us. On to realization, on to our humanity addressed indeed. In economy and industry, in our carriage and expectation, unborn babies resting easy in their mama's wombs, developing in assurance, not simply waiting, listening for the call to enlist as another foot soldier in the emancipation simulation. Let me be clear. A little less than everything is less than nothing. We want real life lived, no longer loving with a limp. All our kin settled in the place where we be mended, the root restored for the people of the muddy sun. Thank you.
Now we're going to enter into a cross-community dialogue about reparations, and that dialogue will be moderated by Jeff Robinson. Jeff Robinson is a deputy legal director at the American Civil Liberties Union and the founder of a nonprofit organization, the Who We Are Project. Robinson has almost 4 decades of experience working on racial justice issues. In recent years, Robinson is focused on educating the public about our true history of racism, which helps us to understand the need for reparations and for the passage of H.R. 40. Turning it over to you, Jeff.
Thank you very much, Michelle. I am Jeff Robinson, Deputy Legal Director at the National ACLU, and at the end of this month, I am leaving that fantastic organization to start a new organization called the Who We Are Project that's going to examine our untold history of anti-Black racism in America. I'm thrilled to be here, and I want to toss it to Susan.
Hello, everybody. My name is Susan Hayase. I'm a longtime activist in the San Jose Japanese American community. I'm a third generation Japanese American. My parents and grandparents were incarcerated at Gila River, Arizona and Amache, Colorado during World War II. I participated in the redress movement through the Nihon Machi Outreach Committee, or NAARC, and the Tule Lake Committee. And I was part of the founding conference of the NCRR, or National Coalition for Redress and Reparations. I was appointed to the Civil Liberties Public Education Fund by President Clinton, and I served as the vice chairperson. I also was a performing member of San Jose Taiko, which is Japanese drums, during the 80s. And I've done a lot of projects with the Japanese American Museum of San Jose. And currently, well, my husband and I are co-founders of the San Jose Nikkei Resistors, which is a grassroots community organization. Thank you.
How about Ron?
Okay, my name is Ron Wakabayashi. During the period of the commission, the Redress Commission, I was the director of the Japanese American Citizens League. Since then, I've spent 20 years as the regional director for the Community Relations Service, U.S. Department of Justice. Just retired, but now I'm working, with Ohio State University, who's trying to pull together lessons learned on truth and reconciliation commissions from around the world. I'm honored to be part of this.
Thank you so much for joining us. And Cam, could you give us a little bit about your background?
Sure. Thanks, Jeffrey, and greetings, everyone. My name is Cam Howard. I am the National Male Co-Chair of NCOBRA, the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America, an organization, a grassroots organization founded for the sole purpose of winning reparations for African descendants in this country. I've been a member for 16 years of NCOBRA. I am also a member of the National African American Reparations Commission that was formed in 2016. At that time, I was a member of a task team appointed to revise HR 40, and I later became the lead writer of the final draft of that legislation, the revised legislation that is in Congress and is in the Senate today.
Cam, thank you so much. And last, but absolutely positively not least, Nkechi, could you introduce yourself to everyone, please?
Thank you so very much, Jeffrey, and greetings, fellow panelists. I'm Nkechi Taifa. I'm currently an inaugural commissioner on the National African American Reparations Commission, NAARC. I'm also the president of the Taifa Group, which is a consulting firm whose mission is to advance justice. I am a founding member of NCOBRA, the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America, which was founded 34 years ago in 1987. But I have been working on the issue of reparations some 20 years before that time, basically as a teenager, having seen the issue in the fold of the Black Panther Party, a newspaper about reparations, about 40 acres and a mule. And I vowed to talk about that issue wherever I could. Decided to go to law school because I wanted to be taken seriously by many of these issues that I've been talking about. And I remember when the Japanese American Redress Bill, the Civil Liberties Act of 1988 was in fact passed. And it was one of the reasons why we in NCOBRA at that early stage decided to work strategically with Congressman John Conyers to introduce a bill, HR 40, which became HR 40, which was patterned specifically off of the Japanese American legislative experience.
I appreciate all of you being here. I am, like you, thrilled to have this conversation. And I want to pick up, Nkechi, where you ended off, because you talked about how the organizations that you were working with were watching as the Japanese American Reparations Bill got passed. And Susan and Ron, I'd like to go to you to ask, who were the folks that were starting the discussion in the Japanese community that led to this bill? Because this wasn't something that happened over just a year or two. Is that right?
No, you're right. Basically, the origins of the Japanese American movement for redress predate the legislative struggle by many years. And actually, if if I were to try to put my finger on what were the founding parents, there are many parents, and one of them was the Asian American movement, which Japanese American young people were involved in helping to build in the 60s and 70s. But what were the parents of the Asian American movement? One of the parents was the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement and the anti-imperialist, anti-war movement and the multiracial struggle to build ethnic studies. Those were incredibly important in the building of the Japanese American redress, even the idea, because as many people might know, one of the effects of the government's treatment of Japanese Americans during World War II was to suppress the ability of Japanese Americans to even comprehend what had happened to them. And so many people who were in camps did not tell their children what happened, and they suffered in silence. And the fact that young people like myself didn't hear that from our parents was very damaging to our sense of ourselves and our ability to understand the racism that was around us. So those are really substantial parents, I think, of the Japanese American redress movement.
It's interesting as I hear Susan say that, I think many Americans might have been surprised that like the Black Panther movement or people engaged in Black Power activism had an influence on what was going on in the Japanese American community.
I guess it is surprising. I guess the reference Susan made to the Asian movement. So I'm one of those characters that's back in the 60s in Los Angeles. And it certainly was. I mean, I remember distinctly that, you know, we mimicked a lot of the behaviors. I mean, we got black leather jackets and we got berets as well, and you know, sort of mimic things for a while. But you know, at the heart of it, you know, what Susan raised is the Black Civil Rights Movement raised the essential question for us. You know, how does that question of identity, of our place in this country, relate to us? And it raised that question. And Susan's, you know, reference to like, we went to ask our parents, you know, and we didn't get answers because, you know, they had suppressed it. And there were maybe 2 books out on the camps. We thought we knew of camps only as our parents introduced them. And I thought of it as summer camp because they said, this is Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so from such a block. And I thought it was summer camp. I didn't have a concept of what it was. And then, you know, if we credit some early people, there's a woman named MICHELE who wrote an early book, Days of Infamy, that raised the issue for the first time. But that's, you know, like 10 years before, you know, this thing gets into the Japanese American Citizens League, which I joined at that point. And I want to just kind of point out, JACL is kind of an establishment, you know, a more mainstream organization. Most of us who are working on Regis were outside of that and doing things like sponsoring pilgrimages to the old camps, and we were being told, don't do that. You know, let it lie. And it took a good while for it to get, you know, migrate into the JACL, where JACL adopted it as, you know, part of their program. But even then, if you know, like one of the things about the whole process is that redress kind of goes through periods of like, there's a brainstorm period where people have different concepts of it. Some people, you know, thought we should go with a direct litigation with a class action suit. The Seattle folks came in with the Laureate bill that went directly for compensation in the beginning. And actually the commission bill, the idea of the commission, was not popular with anybody. It wasn't popular with the JACL. You know, what it was is that the members of Congress said, like, this is our best shot. Because right now, we're not going to get anything passed. There's no one in the Congress except one member who was here during the time of the internment. Mm-hmm. And so we've got to relay that foundation. So the commission bill, you know, was not popular among, I think, it wasn't any of our first choice in any of the groups. But it turned out that that process created a focus and a process of identity formation, as we heard the testimony of people around in 10 different cities, 750 people telling small bits to give us a composite picture of saying, we know a little bit more about what happened. And that was like a critical part of like what is, you know, I think repair, because while we got monetary compensation, that was not meaningful if you go and look back and even survey people today. They wanted it to be a significant enough amount that it wasn't insulting. But if you go back and look at what people said, looked at the repair, and I think, you have Satsuki Ina speaking about intergenerational trauma and hurt. A lot of the repair came that way. And in fact, if we talk about allyship, prior to, the redress effort, I think, Japanese Americans internally and externally were viewed as model minority. And the fact of the camp and our understanding of the camp gave us a platform that allowed us entry to allyships that we continued on from there. So I think we got great gifts out of that, but they're interrelated.
That is just so interesting. And Susan, there was another group, NCRR. Could you talk a little bit about the experience of that group and how it relates to kind of what Ron was just sharing with us?
So the National Coalition for Redress and Reparations formed in 1980. And the reason it formed was, there are a lot of reasons, but I just want to talk about how we knew that we had to unite our community in order to win redress, or to even begin to start fighting for redress. So that's a really important thing. And I think that we have to talk about what are the obstacles to uniting. So one was that, the Japanese American community had to recover from the camps, and it was very traumatic. And I think a lot of people don't realize that a lot of the first generation had no family, and they had they were elderly and they had nothing, and they were in county poverty wards in Santa Clara County. When people came back, they were homeless and they slept on the floors of the church. The business community was damaged, so there were nobody that could hire you. And then the business communities were also damaged because soon after they returned, the urban renewal and redevelopment programs started to wipe people out. And also community organizations, except for the JACL, had all been destroyed. And so there was no political infrastructure for uniting our community. So it was really important to bring everybody. So the NCRR formed. Many of us were activists who had fought for ethnic studies. And many of us also had been in the struggles to try to protect Japantown from redevelopment, both in San Francisco and in Los Angeles. And we realized that if we were going to go for redress and unite the Japanese American community, we had to form a new organization, because the JACL was an organization that existed in the camps and was also manipulated and used by the federal government. And there was a lot of disunity around the political baggage of the JACL. So we knew that we had to form another organization, because there were people who would not work with the JACL. So the NCRR had a particular focus. We were a grassroots organizing group. We welcomed and also focused a lot of attention on organizing grassroots, working class Japanese Americans who would not otherwise have been tapped to join a campaign like this. So we went out and we found people, and we worked with teachers, with nurses, with butchers, with gardeners, with auto mechanics, and with janitors, and people who were not already active, but who, had been keeping the flame alive, basically, and had no forum to make a statement for reparations. So we knew that we had to build a mass movement, that it couldn't be just one organization or one or two organizations. It had to be everybody, and it had to be artists, it had to be writers, it had to be students, it had to be old people, everybody had to be involved. And so that was what the focus of the NCRR was. And So one of the early ideas about the commission was that, well, we'll get all these scholars and we'll get historians and we'll get non-Japanese Americans. And I think the idea was that, well, let's not seem that like we're self-serving and asking for something for ourselves, but we felt very differently. We felt that Japanese Americans who had been in the camp and who had direct experience with Executive Order 9066 and the impact of it, and their children who had also suffered from the destruction of the community, that all of these people had the right to testify. And that was really important. So that was a really important thing that I think that the NCRR represented.
It's very interesting that both you and Ron have identified a value to the commissions that I think many people overlook. And Michiele, I just want to jump to you because there is an obvious transition here as Susan and Ron are talking about the influence of the Black Panthers. And I have this image of you on a street corner finally saying to yourself, maybe I ought to read this thing that I've been selling. And what are they talking about? Reparations. So how did that resonate with you to hear that essentially the same movement that you were becoming akin to was impacting the Japanese American movement for reparations?
This was very surprising because I never had this type of conversation before. My mouth was just wide open. I'm saying, wow. I mean, wow. Because it wasn't just the Black Panthers, it's just about any organization in the Black community, primarily that was talking about Black power or anything post-civil rights. Even during civil rights, Martin Luther King even essentially was talking about reparations. George Foreman, John Foreman, James Foreman interrupted Sunday school at the Sunday service at Riverside Church, calling upon the religious institutions to grant reparations. So it wasn't even just the Black Power movement, but the Black Power movement, any organization had it within their platform, whether it was the Black Panthers, whether it was the Black United Front, whether it was the Nation of Islam, whether it was Republic of New Africa, they all were talking about this issue. But it was when we talk about the forefathers and the foremother in the Black community, I gotta say, in what I'm considering the modern era, that she stretches back before the modern era, was none other than Queen Mother Audley Moore. Queen Mother, who came up during the Garvey movement, during the 1920s. She had to have known or heard something about Callie House during that time, who came before in the late 1898 with the National Ex-Slave Mutual Bounty and Pension Association, which was really the largest grassroots organization, the largest group at that time, talking about pensions from federal agencies for compensation for the enslavement era. So Queen Mother Moore came out of that, and through the Garvey movement, who basically was talking about repatriation, but not swimming across the ocean naked, with reparation, with repair. And then all the way down through, she became part of just about any movement that was talking about reparations. The Republic of New Africa, most specifically, and influenced Imari Abubakari Obadeli, who is considered the father of the modern reparations movement. Most folk know nothing about them, but again, this was Black nationalist politics. The establishment of 5 states in the Deep South, a separate land for people to go to with reparations. But I credit Queen Mother Moore and Imari Obadeli for the modern era leading into the founding of NCOBRA, because they took it out of the sidelines of the Black power, Black national movement, and mainstreamed it amongst many, many Black organizations, civil rights organizations, religious groups, unions, sororities and fraternities and the like. And there are 2 other people I must mention. Reparations Ray Jenkins. There might not be a HR 40 if it were not for Reparations Ray Jenkins from Detroit, from the city that Congressman John Conyers came from. Reverend Joanne Watson had a radio show, and she would say that she would always get this caller from this person named Ray, always talking about reparations, that she gave him that nickname, Reparations Ray. John Conyers would say, this issue has had more callers, more letters than any other issue flowing into his office. And it was because of Reparations Ray. And the last person I would say is Dorothy Lewis, a name no one knows, footnote in history. Dorothy Lewis was an African-American, but she was living in Alaska. And she became part of that Alaskan Native Claims Settlement. I don't know all the specifics, but it was subsumed within the Civil Redress Bill, the Civil Liberties Act. So she came to Washington and she connected with the people with the Black Power movement. She connected with the people with the civil rights and with other Muslims. She became a very mover and shaker within NCOBRA in those early days. And the last thing I would say is that when that bill passed, and NCOBRA had just started about a year earlier when the Civil Liberties Act. And
when you mean that bill, you mean the Japanese American
Redress Bill passed in 1980. We in NCOBRA would look around and say, okay, excuse me, if they could do that for the Japanese Americans, for all that they went through, surely they should be able to do that for Black people in this country. So we work very closely with Congressman John Conyers and strategically and intentionally modeled the bill for Black people, specifically with the route that the Japanese Americans took. First, a commission to study the issue and that would make recommendations to the Congress. And I will say, everybody was not on one accord. I'm telling you, folks back then, Cam, back in the mid 80s was saying, we don't need a commission to study, just, you know, reparations now. We don't need it. But the other voices ruled the day. And we said, well, let's try this and we'll see how this works. And then I'm going to stop and because it's been 34 years now. So we said, let's try this and see if it works. And, you know, Cam can go ahead and take it.
Well, and that it is, it's like, I wanted to jump to Cam because Cam, you talked about the work that you have done on the current version of HR 40. And while the commission is a critical part of that, there is an additional step that commission is now charged with. Could you talk about looking at the Japanese American experience and how that impacted your thinking and brought us to the bill that we have today?
Sure. So first, let me just say it's difficult to come behind Nkechi about the history of NCOBRA or the history of the reparations movement. But I just want to just go back for a second. And, you know, when we talk about reparations, Nkechi definitely talked about the organized effort for redress for crimes that were committed against us, primarily stolen labor and atrocities. But prior to us understanding that our labor was being stolen, the first thing that we knew was stolen from us was our liberty. And then our sovereignty as a people, and thirdly, our humanity as they tried to make us into property. And so the reparations movement began the minute we were put on those ships, where we tried to reclaim our liberty, reclaim our humanity. We didn't know what our ancestors didn't know what they were going to be submitted to at the other end of that voyage. But right there on those ships, they attempted to reclaim and repair what was stolen from them in the form of their liberty. And when we got off the ship, we continued in that vein that reparations was an internal reparations, what we could do for ourselves. And we began to revolt, and we began to run and create maroon societies to regain our sovereignty, to be free, whole, autonomous, and independent, even on this land, even though we were taken away from our land. But that was always a struggle for 200 years, for the entire time of enslavement. There were mass scale revolts in Virginia, 2,000-3,000 organized under Denmark VC.
And
Northern South Carolina, there was just tons, over 250 revolts to reclaim our dignity, reclaim our humanity, our liberty, and our sovereignty as a people. And then we moved into, in the Civil War, we can say Martin Delany and Frederick Douglass were fathers of the reparations movement because they championed President Lincoln to arm Black soldiers so we could fight for our freedom, fight, you know, in the Civil War as Union soldiers to reclaim again our liberty, our humanity, and our sovereignty, because that's what we wanted coming out of the Civil War. And that was what was promised to us the 40 acres and a mule, a separate sovereign territory, semi-sovereign, but autonomous territory for Black people only, who could benefit from their own labor. They could self-determine and create institutions, political, economic, and cultural institutions that would make it that we would fully express our divine and human nature the way we saw fit. But as you know, that was nullified. And then we had to do the organizing, as Nkechi talked about, Callie House and Marcus Garvey and, you know, the Nation of Islam, Black Panther Party, et cetera, moving forward. But I want to just go back to something Susan said about this being a part of the ethnic studies struggle. It wasn't until 1993 where I ever even first heard of the word reparations, or NCOBRA. And I found out about NCOBRA and the reparations at the same time. And it was in reading a book by Maulana Karinga called Introduction to Black Studies. Part of that struggle for ethnic studies led to him writing this book on Black studies. And that's where I became turned on to NCOBRA, turned on to Chokwe Lumumba and Dr. Mario Vidali and the reparations movement. And it wasn't until 10 years later that I actually joined NCOBRA, but the seed had been planted at that particular time. And, you know, Nkechi talked about John Conyers, Congressman Conyers, again, one of the fathers of the modern movement as well, introducing this bill patterned after Japanese American redress bill. And he did so because one, it worked, it passed. And another reason he thought that this is something that he could get passed, knowing the current state of white America, the mental state of white America, that they weren't going to accept a bill that had reparations, a dollar amount, et cetera, et cetera. Let's first take it through this direction. And once we get it past this hump, then we can go and get resources targeted. And it turned out that the white consciousness wasn't having it. And so, you know, 20-something years later, after a tremendous amount of research and scholarly writings and international forums, what the original bill was designed to do was to determine whether or not there was continued injury among current living people of African descent, Black Americans, African Americans, as a result of the crimes of enslavement. And we weren't even calling them crimes then, but as a result of the what they were calling sins of enslavement, the sins of this country. But was there current injuries resulting from Jim Crow segregation? And the bill was supposed to determine that. And then if there were, then make recommendations to Congress. But since that time, the bill was first introduced in 2015, when NAARC began to looking at this question of should we continue HR 40 or should we, you know, do another strategy? We said that, you know, it had already been settled that there was continued injury. The World Conference Against Racism 2001 began with what's happening with people of African descent around the planet is a result of the transatlantic slave trade, the result of enslavement, the result of apartheid and colonialism, all of those social dominating and social oppressive constructs is the very reason why we have all of these disparities that exist in our communities around the globe. And so we began this bill with that understanding that there is current injury, there is a current legacy, and there's all type of data to show that there's current legacy. And so the bill begins there and it says, how wide is that legacy? How deep is that legacy? And what would it take to ameliorate, to mitigate that legacy? And the commission is charged then to develop those proposals, those programs that will address those areas of disparities and address them in the form of full reparation.
I really appreciate that. And as I listen to this conversation and I'm thinking about the ways that these two movements are connected, I want to go back to Susan and Ron for a minute to talk about, both of you said there were differing views in the Japanese American community about what reparations should look like. And as I understand it, there were some in the community who thought there shouldn't even be reparations. And one of the things that people say today is that well, if there are differing views in the African-American community, maybe that means HR 40 shouldn't go forward. How do you respond to that? And I'd just like to hear the experience of your community and how that got resolved.
There were a lot of different opinions, but it was mostly at the beginning. And the reason why that is so is because, as I mentioned, there was a lot of oppression of the Japanese American community, and the deployment by the federal government of the model minority strategy to squash Japanese American political efforts and even just acknowledging what had happened was a large part of that. So, and like I said, there were no forums for Japanese Americans to figure out what to do. You know, there were different ideas about how do you deal with racism, right? And there were no real forums for how to figure out any of that stuff. So, so that's why there was opposition in the beginning. But also, I just want to point out that heavy duty, deployment of the model minority by pundits and, commentators and all sorts of things. I still remember, I think it was an Oliphant political cartoon that showed, these elderly Japanese Americans turning their back on a handful of money. And they said, the caption was, "Oh, we don't want your blood money," and just really trying to hammer that down, that Japanese Americans are too honorable to demand equality, right? And so I think that was a big obstacle that we had to overcome. So that's why we had to build the movement, right? We had to really remind people, what's right. You know that you want to do the right thing. And I think there was another thing that, as we met former incarcerees who were willing to talk about their experience, and a lot of people said, I don't care about myself. I wasn't the person who suffered. It was my parents who suffered. And one of the things that, we said is that, okay, you don't want to do it for yourself, but who do you want to do it for? And they finally, a lot of people said, I don't want this to happen to anybody else. Mm-hmm. And so that was the motivating factor that made people come out, that they didn't know if they would get acknowledgement or vindication, but they just wanted to make sure it didn't. And I think for my generation, we took that as a mission, that this is so important that to fulfill the desires of our parents and our grandparents, it was really important to us. And so that was part of dealing with the unity, right? We also tried to shore people up. I remember we had a workshop in San Jose. People said, what am I supposed to do? There's these news things about reparations for Japanese, and they go to work and all their coworkers yell at them and stuff and put them down. And so we had workshops, how do you talk about reparations with racist people? And stuff like that. Arm people with knowledge, arm people with, how do you discuss due process rights and individual rights, and how do you discuss, racism, and stuff like that. So that's one of the things we did. But also, I guess just technically and historically, we did have a summit meeting between the JACL and the NCRR and the WCR at one point, and we decided on monetary compensation. So that was one of the things that NCRR was pushing from the beginning. We had 5 principles that we were standing for. One was individual monetary compensation. One was compensation to the community. One was overturning the legal basis for the camps. One was support for other people who were being oppressed. And another was public education to try to make an impact on, having something like that ever happen again. But I think
understood. No. And Ron, can you add a couple of things about your perspective on how that whole process worked out?
I think Susan's captured a lot of that process. But the thing that's part of the process as well is that really the commission itself is a tool. And it's a tool for, not just the testimonies that went on before the commission, but the testimony that took place after church, the testimonies that took place at the kitchen table.
Right.
You know, and which start making people whole in getting, you know, and I think the other critical word is that it's a movement, because NCRR is part of that movement. You know, other parts of that movement included, you know, over 100 cities that passed redress bills for wrongful termination.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
when we walked into Congress with the other bill, it's like saying, hey, there's support for this concept, and here's 100 local ordinances that say so concretely. You know, there were, you know, like efforts, for example, like if you look at many of the spokespeople that they were school teachers, particularly elementary school teachers, you know, who presented in the way that an elementary school teachers talk, you know, hi boys and girls.
Right.
But that presentation is saying, this is your military necessity. And that's just bullshit. And the bullshit's right in front of you. You know, but there's other just healing that goes on. And we, you know, Susan referenced some of the controversial role that JACL played. And that was clearly true. It was only until a couple of years ago where there was an apology that was made for, you know, the word resistors that's used in the name of Susan's organization was also the name for resistors who opposed going into military service until their parents were granted full rights back.
Mm-hmm.
They were, you know, in my view, you know, some of the stuff they put forward was among the most honorable, articulate stuff that was written there. And the hard thing for me was that those are literally my brothers and my sisters in Tule Lake.
Right.
And I'm not meaning that figuratively, literally blood brothers and sisters.
Yes.
You know, and I knew that this role had gone on and was a division within, you know, JACL and the treatment. There's a lot of community healing. The resistors today and my nieces and nephews, you know, I could see in them, you know, there's a restoration of like, my dad was a good man. And I said, you're darn right. He's a better man than I ever was.
Wow.
You know, but they get things back like that. I mean, the restoration, the healing, and Satsuki Ina, you know, speaks a lot about that as well. But there's, you know, there's the monetary compensation, and there's all those kind of, you know, the trust fund, all those kind of things that people can talk about. And you know, that's going to be situational. It's going to depend on all kind of other things, what comes place. But what you have within control is the movement. And the movement is self-healing.
It's so profound, and the ways that the communities, both the Japanese American community and the African American community, have to be centrally placed in this healing process is, you know, I have heard it from you and Susan. I'm hearing the exact same thing from Nikichi and Cam. And I want to come to this conversation has just been so rich. I want to come to just one last topic to get thoughts from each of you. We have, on the one hand, incredible movement on HR 40 with over 170 co-sponsors and a legitimacy and an interest that we have not seen in decades. We have this incredible support from the African American community. And then we have the incident in Atlanta that we've already talked about at the beginning of this program. And the way that people go back and forth between optimism and feeling as if, you know, fate is just against us. And I'm just wondering if each of you could share something. And Nikichi, I'm going to start with you. Could you just share, going forward, what is the thing that we should be keeping in mind? One of the most central things in your view that we have to keep in mind about this struggle?
Well, one of the things we need to keep in mind is that reparations is an issue whose time has come. I mean, there may be setbacks, but there has been so much momentum that I would never have imagined. When you have the Jesuits talking about $100 million to for the benefit with respect to the 272 people who were sold to keep Georgetown University from going into bankruptcy. When you see the amalgamated bank talking about reparations, when you see Ben and Jerry's ice cream, you know, this is an issue that is just exploding all over. But the one thing I would say that I want people to keep in mind is that the harm was multifaceted. The harm of the enslavement and post-enslavement degradation all the way down today was multifaceted. Thus, the remedy must be multifaceted as well. Within NAARC, the National African American Reparations Commission, we talk about a number of different points. And I just want to just list them basically to keep in mind as we're going forward. These are points that hopefully will be presented to the commission once it is established by Congress. But some forms of redress could be a formal apology and establishment of a ma'afa. Ma'afa means the great like Holocaust or calamity, an institute, a ma'afa institute. The right of repatriation and creation of a knowledge, an African knowledge base, the right to land for social and economic development, funds for cooperative enterprises and socially responsible entrepreneurial development, resources for health, wellness, and healing of Black families and communities, education for community development and empowerment, affordable housing for healthy Black communities and wealth generation, strengthening Black America's information and communications infrastructure, preserving Black sacred sites and monuments. And the last point is repairing the damages of the criminal injustice system. Those are just some examples of what a reparatory justice package could look like.
Thank you so much. And I think what a wonderful answer for people who say, well, reparations is just about a check and nothing else, isn't it? And I think anybody listening to that answer, Nkechi, has to go, wait a minute, I'm hearing something that's a lot more complicated than that. Susan, can I jump to you, kind of like a closing thought on what do you think we can be focused on that would be most important?
Okay. Well, one of the things I want to thank Cam and Nkechi for their comments about, looking at the Japanese American Redress and Commission as some kind of a model. But I also want to point out that the Japanese American Redress movement, even though it was addressing systemic racism and it was focused on the denial of equality under the law, that monetary compensation under that Civil Liberties Bill could not really address the larger issue of white supremacy and the legacy of slavery built into the fabric of this country and the institutions. And I mention that because I've read about Thurgood Marshall when he was the counsel for the NAACP, and he was going after school desegregation. And one of his strategies was he went after de facto segregation first. And one of those cases was called Mendez versus Westminster in California, which was segregation of Mexican-American children. And so he went after those cases because they were establishing a precedent that you could do that. And then only then did he go after Brown versus Board of Education, the legal segregation cases. And so I think that the way that I'm looking at Japanese American redress victory is that we made a little chip in the wall. And I also want to point out that it wasn't inevitable that we were going to win that. If you look very closely at many, many points, it almost seems coincidental or miraculous that certain things happen. Like, for instance, the bill was bottled up in committee for years before the majority changed and it could get out of committee. So there were a lot of things. And then the signing of the bill, Reagan had threatened to veto it, and it's still mysterious to this day why he, there's, yeah, I have some theories, but anyway. So I think that if we had lost, we talked about that too, so if we had lost, I think it would have been really terrible. We would have felt really terrible, but I think that most of us were in it for the long haul, and we would have kept fighting not necessarily just for redress, but you know, in the early 2000s, a lot of former redress activists in the Japanese American community endorsed HR 40. And now we're trying to organize the broader Japanese American community to support HR 40 and to be a part of this broader long-term movement that Black Americans have been fighting for many, many years. And I want to point out that, you know, Japanese Americans, we haven't been here as long as Black people, and that the liberation movement of Black Americans has international prestige, and we are in awe, and we are so appreciative of everything that Black Americans have fought for to make the Bill of Rights mean something. You know, even if white supremacy aced you out of the benefits of those victories. And we're here with you. So
powerful. Thank you so much. Ron, I just want to come to you for final thoughts about how do you see the path forward? What do you think we should really be focused on?
Well, let me approach that by saying, you know, that I described, and Susan and I both described early on, that the attitude, particularly of activist community, was that the notion of a model minority. A book came out around the time of just before the commission started, called Nisei the Quiet American, and that was the title was controversial, much, and the book as well. But it implies passivity of rolling over and not fighting back, and you know, coming, you know, the younger folks and activists coming out of the civil rights movement and the anti-war movement, you know, look through, you know, and talk about third generation, looking at the second generation, and saying they failed. They failed. They didn't defend the community. They didn't defend their parents. They failed. And you can hear that voice at the beginning of the commission hearings. As people learn more about like what the situation, circumstances, and what people actually did do, the voice changed and said, thank you, we recognize what you did. The 442nd became the most decorated in American history. The resistors stood up. You know, there was a great deal of honor that went on there. And if you think about it, it was, you know, I became a father around that time. And I remember hearing my national president say to me that he was feeling low because he said his son just graduated high school. And I said, you shouldn't be sad. You've got all kinds of money. You can pay for college. I got to worry. but you can cover college. He says, no. My son said, Dad, you know, like you're in Who's Who, you're in the newspapers, but you weren't there when I needed you. And I heard something that said, like, I never want to hear that. I never want to hear that.
Yes.
And I think, you know, I'm telling that to say, that's what the community got back. You know, the younger folks saying that, like, you need to feel like your dad could be my dad could be your dad.
Understood.
You know,
understood.
And for the dad, you need to, you know, like with kids, that's the one time you get to be God. Yeah.
It's by showing how to live a purposeful life.
So, you know, there are things that, you know, like people, you know, can't take away from you that are there, you know, in the process.
Thank you so much. And Cam, I want to come to you, brother, to close us out. Any thoughts? This has been pretty powerful, but any thoughts that you can kind of add on to as we move away from this segment?
So yeah, thank you, Jeff, and thank you so much, Susan, for sharing those words of solidarity and camaraderie with us. Thank you so much, and Ron as well. My last words would probably be that we must seize this time. We would not get this, all the things that have been happening within the last few years, you know, around George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, you know, all of the efforts to wrestle justice out of this country that have culminated in this moment. We have to seize this moment. We have to be clear that what we're fighting for is justice. The transatlantic slave trade, colonialism, slavery in this country, Jim Crow, apartheid, those were crimes. Those were transatlantic slave trade was an international criminal cabal, a group of merchants as well as monarchs came together and made some rules amongst themselves to create all type of human rights violations around the world. Those were criminal acts. The government that was set up in this country in 1776 was a result of a takeover of what had been established in the colonies, a criminal enterprise established in the colonies that was taken over by the merchants and created a government to continue the crimes, the crimes of the stuff of our labor, the crimes of all type of atrocities. So what we're fighting for is justice from criminal acts committed against our people, and that this nation has a tremendous amount of resources to address and redress these crimes. It's not like this nation is poor and impoverished. This is a very wealthy nation. It can redress these crimes, and it must redress these crimes. And we're not going to stop until those crimes that have been committed and the ongoing injury. I was asked yesterday what reparations about the past. Reparations is not about the past. Reparations is about the present, and it's about the future.
Right now.
You know, it's about right now. We're suffering as a people right now as a result of the crimes of the past, and that suffering, that harm, that injury will be perpetuated until those crimes that were committed are rightfully addressed in the form of full reparations. So we must seize the time. We must make sure that we're arguing from a standpoint of justice, and that there's enough resources in the government coffers to adequately, over a number of years, address the crimes that have been committed to the extent that we suffer.
This is going to take a while to solve, and that's an important point. I just want to thank all of you for your contributions. I want to thank all of you for your activism and your advocacy on these issues. And folks, we're going to now hear an incredibly powerful piece from Troy Osaki from Seattle.
Hey everyone, my name is Troy. I'm a poet, organizer, and attorney from Seattle, Washington. Thank you so much for having me here today. I am here in full support of HR 40 and truly believe Congress providing deep reparations for slavery is one of the many steps needed to advance towards a more just world. As a young Japanese American person, I grew up listening to stories of my grandma's experience with incarceration during World War II. How she was uprooted from her home in Seattle, how she was sent to a detention center in Puyallup, and then a camp in Minidoka, Idaho, and then Crystal City, Texas. I listened to how she was separated from her father, who was seen as a greater threat to national security, and subsequently sent to prison camps all over the country. And I also listened to stories of my dad, who helped successfully fight for reparations for Japanese Americans while working in DC. And although reparations didn't give my grandma those 3 to 4 years of her life back, I do believe it brought to light the systemic injustices that needed to be examined to continue to fight toward a truly free world. And similarly, I see HR 40 as one of the many critical steps that is needed to be taken in order to address and someday end the over-oppression Black people in America face today. We really must do all that we can to defend Black communities. And I have a poem I'd like to share with you all today, and I'd like to offer it as an act of solidarity. This poem is titled, "Minidoka is the first camp your grandma is incarcerated in. Crystal City is the second. You thumb through your grandma's yearbook from when her middle school self wore whatever dress her mother could conjure. Maybe It belonged to a neighbor girl from another barrack who grew out of it. Maybe it was unhemmed but fit well enough. In camp, your grandma couldn't miss school without every other kid finding out. So instead, she missed her bedroom, the daffodils off 14th near Temple. How smooth Lake Washington was midsummer. She missed her dad, who looked like her, but was taken elsewhere. In Germany, a grenade goes off and your grandma is shoveled onto a train. Texas smells like pine wood and sunburn. There's an unending fence similar to before. Your grandma is back with both her parents, and the war somehow feels a bit bearable. The country you and her were born in eventually wins, and still she isn't given back her dad's laughter, his morning hum, all of what disappeared for 3 years until her family was imprisoned together. Decades after your grandma is released, she returns to each camp her dad wrote to her from. Montana, Louisiana, New Mexico, Texas. The land is bare, and whatever mess hall or guard tower was once there isn't. As if the war is done, as if there isn't a daughter left who's separated from her dad. Somewhere a daughter still is, if not in a camp, then at an airport or behind a wall. Somewhere a dad, not your grandma's, hasn't seen the sun in 3 days, hasn't breathed beyond cement walls since before detainment. And still your country says it won the war, says it's proud of its name and its mouth. You are in your grandma's home as she bakes a sheet of sugar cookies. Her memory becomes a kitchen knife you hide beneath your pillow. You sharpen its blade every night. You trust no country that can smile and say its own name with so much of someone else's blood in its mouth. It's 1941, and you are at the center of your grandma's camp. She's looking at a mountain miles away. Says, sometimes I stand here, right here, staring, and I swear I can see the other side. Thank you.
That was such a wonderful expression from Troy Osaki. Thank you so much, Troy. So grateful for all the truth and all the wisdom and all the beauty that everyone has been bringing into this program. And now I have this wonderful opportunity to have a conversation with two extraordinary women who have been working around trauma and reparations and repair. And so excited to be in this dialogue with them. So let me tell you who we have with us. We have Dr. Christy Higgins. And Dr. Higgins is a community healer, African-centered psychologist, and professor who takes a holistic approach to healing mind, body, spirit, and community. Dr. Higgins has had a multifaceted career as a clinician, educator, consultant, trainer, and administrator, having worked at UC Davis in student health and counseling, and now as a founding member and president of Safe Black Space, a developing nonprofit focused on healing Black people from racial stress and trauma. Obviously, there is much more that I could say about Dr. Higgins, but we'll allow her the opportunity to say more for herself. We also are so grateful and graced to have with us Dr. Satsuki Ina, who is a professor emeritus in the School of Education at California State University, Sacramento. She was born in the Tule Lake Segregation Center, an American concentration camp during World War II. Now, as a licensed psychotherapist, her primary clinical work has focused on intergenerational families struggling with legacies of trauma. Her research on the long-term impact of the World War II incarceration on the Japanese American family has led her to produce 2 award-winning documentary films, Children of the Camps and From a Silk Cocoon. She is a community activist, educator, and spokesperson advocating for social justice, and continues her psychotherapy consultation practice in Oakland, California, addressing issues of community and historical trauma. Welcome, 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 both of you. So honored to be in this conversation with you. Although I've just given a bit of an introduction, I would love for each of you to say hello and say a little bit about who you are in your own words and what your relationship is to this conversation about reparations. We can start with Dr. Ina.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for attending, and thank you, Michelle, for that introduction. So I was born during World War II in an American concentration camp. My parents were resistors and eventually actually renounced their American citizenship in protest. I am currently a co-founder of Tsuru for Solidarity, which is a grassroots social justice organization comprised of Japanese Americans who were incarcerated during World War II and their descendants. And our work has been to stand in solidarity with other communities who are being targeted today. And I'm proud to be here as a representative for my community to support efforts to make HR 40 happen. Thank you.
Well, it's an honor to be here as well. Thank you for the invitation. My name is Dr. Christy Higgins. I, as you mentioned, am an African-centered psychologist, a community healer, and a professor of psychology. I'm also one of the co-founders of Safe Black Space, which is a developing nonprofit really devoted and committed to addressing anti-Black racism and helping people of African ancestry to heal and thrive in the midst of society right now that is focused on, or has been historically focused on racism. I'm also a member of the Association of Black Psychologists and a trainer of the Emotion Emancipation Circles, which were developed by the Community Healing Network, along with the Association of Black Psychologists. And what they do is focus on addressing the narrative, the story, the lie that's been told about the inhumanity of Black people. In my history, my connection with reparations has primarily really evolved out of me providing support to Black people, both individually and collectively within the community, to begin to understand and unpack racism, and to recognize the intergenerational impact of trauma on our community. So I help to promote healing and empowerment, which can hopefully take us to collective action and creating change. And I'm so excited about being here today. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, both of you. And what rich and powerful histories you have both in your personal lives and in your professional lives related to this issue. So let's get right into it. When we talk about reparations, from your perspectives, each of you, what is it we're talking about? What does it mean? What's your definition? And I want to start with you, Dr. Higgins.
Well, I think for me, what it represents broadly is about attending to the historical wrongs, the abuse, the history, the harm that has really impacted Black people for generations, for hundreds and hundreds of years, by no fault of our own. So recognizing the impact of the legacy of enslavement, that it still exists today as a result of things that were done to us. And so reparations is really about repairing that harm, about correcting those historical wrongs, and realizing that they still exist in contemporary times right now when we think about structural and institutional racism. So it is around looking at different opportunities and ways to address that.
I think that racism trauma is a destructive and dehumanizing force that fractures the self, family, and communities. And so reparation for me is a lot about healing. And the healing can take many forms. It is to either demand or actions taken by the perpetrator to restore the victim's humanity. And there are many ways to do that, and I think we'll address that further, but to be able to institutionally cleanse our country by examining, reporting truth, redefining the meaning of white supremacy, and deep structural change will need to happen in order for healing to take place. And so I think HR 40 is the natural and most pressing first step to make that happen. We have to start educating ourselves. We have to educate the community. And ultimately, what I've learned from reparations for the Japanese Americans is all of us have to take responsibility for reparations.
Both of you have really referenced that underneath this conversation of reparations, right, is a reckoning of a truth, of a harm that has been done. And you've spoken about racism and white supremacy. And so first step, right, is understanding that a harm has been done. So then you've touched on this a little bit, but what forms can a repair take? What are the many things that could mean? Because I think people get hung up on the idea of money or of certain things, right? But I imagine there's so many things that could mean. So maybe Dr. Ina, you could start this time.
Well, I'll start with a quick story. When my mother got her reparations check, I went to go visit her in San Francisco, and her desk was piled with papers. And I said, well, where's the check? I want to see the money. And she said, it's over there somewhere in this pile. But when I walked to her desk, on the wall was framed the apology from President Reagan. And I said, what does this mean for you? And she said, I feel like I finally got my face back. And for her, she's not a rich woman, or, you know, she lived a very, you know, conservative, financially conservative life, but it was the loss of dignity, the loss of her humanity that had been like a ghost hovering over her and her descendants. So to have the apology didn't make a huge difference in her, you know, physical life, but she felt that she had gotten her honor back. That somehow the apology, it wasn't that she was grateful that he felt sorry, or the American government, American public felt sorry, but more that it was an acknowledgement. It was a way in which the truth of who she was, her humanity, was restored to her, and her sense of dignity. So I think the many forms that reparations can take is to educate and correct the narrative about American history, and particularly for the Japanese Americans. Once redress was passed, the truth of the story came pouring out. People who weren't able to speak, who didn't feel that they had the right to share their stories, came flooding out. So we have now today what was kind of a empty space, now filled with poetry and literature and music and drama and films that tell the story in all its richness and all of its tragedy. The repair took place in releasing our creativity, something that was really lost in my generation. I think that also memory is a really important part of repair, that we're encouraged, supported. We find spaces like safe Black spaces, like our healing circles for change, where it's safe to remember, to recall, to recount in all of its darkness what our families have experienced. I think that there are many ways, but the other way is I think that we need a massive restructuring of our institutions. And like I say, I feel like our institutions have been stained and need a massive cleansing to tell the truth, and actually to be led by people of color to tell that truth. So that means schools, that means religious organizations, it means social organizations, it means government that will require that we stand shoulder to shoulder with each other, not stepping on communities of color's backs.
I just had like this actual like physical, emotional reaction when you talked about the healing that came from acknowledgement. And I think in the Black community, there is often such a lack of acknowledgement of not only what people endured hundreds of years ago, but what has continued to build upon that. And so Dr. Higgins, I want to turn to you and also invite you to speak to what you think repair could mean for the Black community and what forms you think it could also take.
Sure, yeah, thank you for that. And thank you, Dr. Ina, just for sharing the story of your mother and your family and your community's experiences. It's so powerful to be able to give voice to what people experienced back in the day, but as well as currently, right? Kind of the day-to-day trauma and experiences that Black people in particular experience as it relates to being Black. And I want to use the analogy I heard someone refer to that I think is really helpful to consider when we think about reparations. And that is, when we think about if someone were to, using an analogy of a physical injury, right? If someone were to have been stabbed multiple times, they have a severe injury as a result, they would go to a hospital to get treatment, to get healing, to get a sense of repair of what that injury has been about, right? And there'd be a number of specialist providers, treatments that would be provided in order to help that person heal, right? There might be a surgeon to help repair ligaments if they have to go into surgery, or a nurse that would attend to their needs while they were in the hospital, a pharmacist who would make sure that they have the medication that they need, a psychologist that would be available to address the trauma of being stabbed multiple times. And so I want to use that as an analogy for what reparations might look like, mean, and could be for Black people. It's around understanding whatever that quote unquote hospital or hospitals might need to support the experiences of Black people and the historical legacy of enslavement. So again, if we think of disparities that have existed and persisted for us, we see that Black people are often at the bottom of every single one. When it comes to education, or when it comes to the wealth gap, to health disparities, and so on, right? And so that means the approach that we take to reparations needs to be multi-level and multifaceted. So it can look like a number of different things, and a number of things have been proposed. And again, I think HR 40 will do an amazing job, as it will open up opportunities to continue to explore this. But it could be land transference, right? When we think of, again, 40 acres and a mule, we didn't get those 40 acres. The promises that were made were revoked. And so it could be land transference. It could look at housing opportunities, direct restitution in terms of financial needs, that financial means, right, that might go to individuals or the community as a whole. It could involve scholarships and jobs, tax cuts perhaps, but also this idea of addressing the trauma explicitly and allowing the community and the larger society and institution of the government to recognize what has happened and what continues to happen.
Thank you for that. And, you know, as we just think of this long line from the past to now and into the future, and talking about reparations for things that happened in the past, but we're also very well aware that there are repercussions even now. And I'm thinking about recent events that have impacted the Asian and Asian American community related to the rise in anti-Asian hate crimes under COVID, and then the horrible shooting event in Atlanta. I'm thinking about so many stories of Black men, Black women being killed by police. And last summer, George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and the justice that hasn't yet come following those. And so I'm just wondering from both of you, like, how do you factor in recent events into this conversation? How does this all fit together for you? And Dr. Higgins, if you want to begin, that would be great.
Much going on right now in our world, and I do want to especially honor what happened in Atlanta and the very current issue that is present in our lives. And I also want to acknowledge the ongoing, as you named, some of the more recent issues around Black people being killed. The actual anniversary of Breonna Taylor's killing was just a few weeks ago, right? George Floyd and kind of the current case and all of that is happening right now, right? Stephon Clark out of Sacramento, in terms of that spurred the work of Safe Black Space, the anniversary of his being killed was couple weeks ago. And so there are triggers that happen, of course, when when lives are lost as a result of whether it's police brutality or other, means or methods of people being killed because of their Blackness. And there's ways that we get triggered by the media, by social feeds that come up. And so it makes it very real day to day for Black people to at times fear for their life, for their safety, for their children, for their families. And so it's not as though this is anything that goes away. But what can happen is this sense of PTSD, not only in terms of traditional post-traumatic stress disorder, but post-traumatic slavery disorder, but realizing that it's not post, there's nothing that it's not over, the trauma continues. And so it's a challenging time. And what may happen at times for people of African ancestry, that there can be a development of a sense of numbness in order to kind of disconnect from the ongoing onslaught of what feels like attacks to our humanity, whether that's literal, right? That could be me that got killed, but also attacks to our humanity in terms of how we're seen or perceived or what we have access to or not. And so it's a trying time. And I think reasons why things like the EECs and Safe Black Space and the circles that Dr. Ina provides are so very critical and necessary, because yes, we have to make changes and impact at the institutional level, at systemic kind of issues, but there's also a movement and a need to make sure that we are healing ourselves and our communities so that we're even more equipped to address what's happening in our world.
Thank you. Dr. Ina?
Dr. Higgins describes it well, that we continually keep getting triggered. So the triggering means that when you experience a trauma, it's so overwhelming that you can't fully cope with it. So you compartmentalize the memory, you numb yourself, all these strategies that are developed so that you're not in that constant shortness of breath and vigilance that trauma requires you to be aware of your environment. So in the Asian American community, we are all definitely stirred up. We've, if there was a way we were numbing ourselves and, you know, and in many ways feeling like we aren't currently the target, so we could serve as allies to other communities that are targeted, allies at the border, allies pushing for Black lives. And then on a dime, we could be the next one. And I had this experience the other day when I decided to go for a walk. And this was just before the event about the Chinese woman in San Francisco downtown that beat the crap out of the guy that attacked her. I don't know if you saw that, but he punched her in the face and she had her stick and she bloodied him with her cane. She's 76 years old. So she's younger than I am. But what I thought was when I went for my walk, I had on my mask and I had on a hat, and which I always wear. But when I was walking, I realized, oh, this is good because people can't tell that I'm Asian. And so I had this twisted moment where I thought, you know, I've worked so hard to be proud of how I look and who I am. You know, I had to question, am I disguising? Do I feel justified in doing that? Or should I be more brave? You know, and I decided it wasn't safe to be on the street. I turned around and came back. And then sure enough, that night was the news about this woman in Chinatown, San Francisco. And I thought, it's difficult to heal a trauma wound when it's continually breathing down your neck. It's like, could be there in a hair trigger moment. And here we are in this moment.
Right. So hard to heal when the traumas keep coming. But both of you are doing work right now that addresses that trauma in your communities. And so I see our time is running short. So I want to really just have an opportunity for each of you to highlight some of the ways that you're bringing healing into these communities. Dr. Ina, you want to begin?
Sure. So Tsuru for Solidarity is a direct action organization. We demonstrate, we protest, we sign petitions, get organized communities of non-voters, many areas of our work. But what we found was that after every action, it was really important that we gathered together with our allies. So it's a cross-community gathering called Healing Circles for Change. And what we found is that when we sat together and shared our stories, there were stories we never heard first person from each other. And it strengthened our bond. And our work is about solidarity, about working cross-community, about being allies, being the compassionate witness and centering the targeted community, but being there as part of the support and resource for communities who are under attack right now. And so we have, right now we have 50 trained facilitators. We've been asked just this week to provide healing circles for change in many Asian American communities across the country right now. Yeah, that's the work we're doing, and we're really glad to be able to provide that.
I'm so glad that work is happening. I want to make sure to spend a little bit of time talking specifically about some of the work of Safe Black Space Community Healing Circles. I'm one of the co-founders of these circles, which really began, as I mentioned, about 3 years ago, after the killing of Stephon Clark here in Sacramento, which is where I live. And they emerged as well out of, I mentioned the work of the Community Healing Network and the Association of Black Psychologists and the Emotional Emancipation Circles. And Safe Black Space is a kind of a unique adaptation of some of the racial trauma healing toolkit that I and others had helped put together a few years ago. And what we do is offer circles that are specifically for people of African ancestry, so Black identified, to provide an opportunity to talk about, again, some of the challenges that we face as a community, to provide culturally and African-centered strategies for coping and responding, to raise awareness about, again, what white supremacy looks like and feels like, and doing it in a way, again, that is affirming of who we are, reminding ourselves of the truth of who we were before enslavement, before the Ma'afa, which is often referred to as the, well, a lot of things, but the African Holocaust, which is still in existence today. And so one of my mentors, colleagues, Dr. Theopia Jackson, the current president of ABSI, gave me this analogy that I just love to use, which is around, sometimes people give pushback, like, why do you need circles just for Black people? And shouldn't other people be able to be involved? And then the answer is no, because when we think about trauma, and the example is if a woman was seeking help and support for a trauma that she experienced because she had been sexually assaulted or abused or raped by a man, we would not ask that woman to be in a group setting and have men be a part of that experience, right? To be re-traumatized by the traumatizer. And so part of what we do in Safe Black Space is, again, limit our membership, our participation to people who identify as Black. And our tagline is home, healing, and hope. So with this idea of how do we create this healthy Black family, right, that can begin to reconnect with the truth of who we are, to build up our own internal and collective resources so we can go back into a world right now which does not value who we are. And so I'm really proud of what we're doing. We've got about 25 volunteers, and in addition to our healing circles, are kind of expanding what we do, putting the word out, offering interactive webinars. And there's so much work to be done.
Feels like this healing work that both of you have talked about is another form of repair, right? And if we could be more intentional and affirmative about creating those spaces where people can get that support for their healing, that would be an amazing thing that we could do, right? Chance for a last word. I mean, this is about HR 40, this is about reparations. What do you want to say to the people about that as we to wrap up? Final words. Brief parting shot. Dr. Higgins, I see you, so why don't you go ahead, see you smiling.
I'm sure you wanted to close first. So I think this has been very well said throughout this conversation, but recognizing the impact of white supremacy, being able to call it for what it is, to recognize it, and understand the impact is very real for all communities of color. And so stop denying it, interrupt the bias and the racism directly when and where you see it, and help to create change. So if people are concerned or don't understand what reparations are, why this is needed, do your research, right? Be open to learning. And I encourage folks to ask their Congress members to sponsor and to support HR 40. That will create, I think, openings and change and transformation, which is so sorely needed.
Thank you so much. Dr. Ina?
Yeah, I want to echo what Susan Hayase said in the earlier panel. Japanese American redress and reparation that took place in 1988 was a rare experience. We're the only community that ever received redress and reparations. And it was just a chip in a huge, gigantic boulder of oppression and racism. And what we need today is unity. And what we learned from the Japanese American experience is a small part of what we can contribute to the knowledge that HR 40 will explore and extend. And I think the Japanese American community, many of us, want to put forth all our effort to support HR 40, to work with you together, to make it happen, because it's only when we're all free that true repair will take place. So thank you for this opportunity, and thank you, Dr. Higgins.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, both of you. Just so grateful for your brilliant and passionate spirits and work. And thank you so much for joining this panel.
Thank you.
I'm so grateful to have been able to have that amazing conversation with Dr. Higgins and Dr. Ina. And now we get to hear from another really amazing advocate. Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee is an influential and forceful voice in Washington, D.C. She's serving her 11th term as a member of the United States House of Representatives. She represents the 18th Congressional District of Texas, centered in Houston, which is the energy capital of the world. She is dedicated to upholding the constitutional rights of all people. She's currently the first female ranking member of the Judiciary Subcommittee for Crime, Terrorism, Homeland Security, and Investigations, and is leading the way on criminal justice reform through groundbreaking legislation, including the Sentencing Reform Act, Law Enforcement Trust and Integrity Act, the RAISE Act, the Fair Chance for Youth Act, Khalif's Law, and the American Rising Act of 2015. One of the things, though, about which Congresswoman Jackson Lee is so proud is being the lead sponsor on H.R. 40 and continuing to carry the torch of the late Congressman John Conyers on the quest for reparations for African American people. Please hear from Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee.
What a significant moment in history, this outstanding forum of Japanese Americans and African Americans pushing the movement for reparations and H.R. 40. Thank you so very much for this significant Seattle forum. Thank you to the ACLU and all of your leadership for joining us in the last 2 years of making a significant contribution to moving H.R. 40 forward. Thank you to the Japanese American community for finding our common mutuality, a mutuality of our history, mutuality of our oppression, mutuality of our struggle, and mutuality, I hope, of our victory. Thank you for participating. And those who joined us in testimony on the H.R. 40 hearing, thank you again for providing such insightful testimony. And as well, thank you to Secretary Norma Mineta, who has been a strong advocate for pushing this legislation. It was in 1942, Executive Order 960, that President Franklin Delano Roosevelt caused the internment of 120,000 Japanese Americans. No, it was not for security reasons. There was not one iota of information that suggested these hardworking families should be snatched away from their homes, their children wondering what had mom and dad done, their wealth taken away from them. They were denied their dignity in this country. Yes, they were denied their dignity. But I can give you the answer. It was nothing but racism and xenophobia. We have faced it, and we must face it again in this country. I'm reminded of the tragedy of the last couple of days when 8 precious souls were killed by a 21-year-old white man who indicated that he had some issue that he had to address, and unfortunately, a law enforcement officer said he had a bad day. Just be reminded, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 6 of those killed were Asian American women. Women who suffered the oppression from the early stages when the Chinese Exclusion Act was passed in the 1880s to ensure that Chinese and others could not come to this country. Even though we know Japanese Americans have been here for decades, they still face the horrors of discrimination and the rise in attacks on Asian Americans. Those 6 women who were killed in Atlanta symbolize the increasing rage that has occurred against Asian Americans from wherever their heritage has been. They've been attacked for the ugliness of being part of the COVID-19 virus. As one of my colleagues, Ted Lieu, said, I am not a virus. Asian Americans are not a virus. And so this forum is particularly powerful, and it is galvanizing. And I view it as a call to action because we are so much intertwined with our history. Thank you for supporting H.R. 40, the Commission to Study and Develop Reparation Proposals. Reason being is that we're on the precipice of doing something that has never happened in the United States Congress. Thank you for the over 300 letters sent by the Japanese American community to support this legislation. because you understand what reconciliation, repair, and restoration is, repairing what occurred. African Americans, slaves that they were in bondage for over 200 years. They were not given the constitutional or the Declaration of Freedom until 1863. Those west of the Mississippi, Texas, where I'm from, were given the word in 1865, now called Juneteenth, when Captain General Granger came to the shores of Galveston and said that those who had remained enslaved for 2 extra years could be free. Nothing was ever provided for those 200 years. Those 200 years plus, those slaves gave America her wealth, built the Wall Street banks, made cotton king, provided the impetus of the transatlantic slave trade, which again was a moneymaker for America. Slavery was the pronouncement of this government. It was sanctioned by the Constitution. When slaves were not made a whole person, did not get the dignity of citizenship in this country. And of course, it was further confirmed by all kinds of laws in those colonies, and yes, in the South. Slavery was the original sin of this nation. So we understand that we must walk this path together. We must walk this journey together. We must ensure that our commitment to each other with the history of the internment of Japanese Americans never to be forgotten. As you well know, we stood with you in 1988 when the Civil Rights Act was passed to provide compensation to Japanese Americans for internment. Never enough, but the statement was made that America had done wrong, that there was no security threat, as I said, xenophobia and racism. We thank you for your strength and your fight during that time. We were proud as African Americans and the Judiciary Committee to stand with you. I was not in Congress, but I well knew of the work that had to be done to come to that point. Thank you for standing with John Conyers, the original person who introduced this legislation in 1989. When he introduced H.R. 40, the Commission to Study Reparations, we have since enhanced that to give it an action item to bring in so many different people. Those young people who understand action is what we need. It is now H.R. 40, the Commission to Study and Develop Reparation Proposals. This forum is a provocative, important statement that says that you're standing with this legislation and the concept of reparations for America to acknowledge the original sin and to move forward on this legislation that will be marked up and to go to the floor of the House, then to the United States Senate with no hesitation and signed by the President of the United States. I am challenged by your leadership. I am challenged by your spirit. Oh, I am challenged by your history and by what you have lived. I am challenged because you too experience the hatefulness of xenophobia and racism. And those Asian women who died on a cold, hard floor in Atlanta did not deserve that death, nor did the teenager who was beaten and had to go to a hospital, or a 81-year-old woman who was hit over the head and then set on fire, or that father and son that was chased in the subway and hit over the head. None of that should be what America is, nor the killing of George Floyd, nor the constant refrain of Black men losing their life, nor the long-term disparities in education and healthcare, most evidence in the high numbers of African Americans who got the sickest and died with COVID-19. So you can see this forum is a mighty and important statement going forward. For that reason, I am grateful that we had this opportunity to communicate, and I ask that we stand together for the rising sun, that we will be able to stand collectively, Japanese Americans, African Americans, and others who have been similarly situated, and sing the song that we have sung in our civil rights movement, not that we shall overcome, but that we have overcome. H.R. 40 is on the way, and our power is the power we share with each other. Thank you for your work.
I told you so. What a powerful and informative and inspirational forum, topped off by the words of Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. This courageous leader is on a mission. She's a warrior woman, and her mission is to cleanse the soul of America of its original sins. That is to say, the original sin of enslavement and all of those sins that were created, including the dispossession of Native Americans, towards creating a more perfect union. She's on a mission, and we want to be on that mission too. And she knows that reparatory justice by passing HR 40 is the key. HR 40 is the key. So it's time to engage. It's time to act. It's time to move beyond being an eyewitness to history. We can all be on the sidelines. Don't be an eyewitness to history. We want you to join in making history. So we invite you to join the movement to pass reparations today. Forward ever, reparations now. Thank you.